History Inside a Nutshell, the show where we sail into our port of call discussing maritime history.
What were the origins of the switch theory? If you have never heard of this before, then where have you been? If you have, prepare yourself for the in-depth evidence that is about to follow. This video needs no introduction, so we are going to be talking about the origins of the switch theory and ask, were they switched? To understand the theory, you must go back to the beginning. In 1907, shipping companies in the British and European shipping trades competed to see who could build the biggest and fastest ships in the world. Although Germany outrivaled Britain years before, Britain made a comeback when a company, the Cunard Line, launched two new ships later named the Lusitania and Maritime. A second British company, the White Star Line, hatched a plan to build a new breed of class liners. The result was the construction of the Olympic-class liners, the Olympic and the Titanic. Upon her launch in October of 1910, the Olympic was involved in a series of accidents. The most serious was a collision with the HMS Hulk in September of 1911. Following the incident, White Star Line and the Willis, Faber and Company approached the maritime insurance policy Lloyd's of London to draw up an insurance policy on both ships, should an event happen again. Already, there is a video on the insurance policy and a link will be left in the description box and the card above. Following the policy, there must have been talks on the ships, and within months of the policy being drawn up, the Titanic sank in the North Atlantic Ocean. Now fast forward to 1914, when Raymond Asquith, a junior counsel for the Board of Trade, wrote a letter to the British newspaper, The Times, sharing a conspiracy involving Thomas Andrews, J. Bruce Ismay, and Captain Edward Smith. The architect, the owner, and the captain were partners in an infamous conspiracy to repair their desperate fortunes by sinking the ship and sharing the insurance money. From Asquith's letter, entitled A Titanic Analogy, it is interesting to hear a modern conspiracy from a member of the Board of Trade who was at the British Inquiry, who shared his thoughts with the media. However, there would have been a strong chance that it was either made up for political reasons. Around that time of the disaster, there was the Irish Home Rule Bill of 1912. This government bill gave Ireland self-government, which would give the country home rule, but asserted the supreme authority of the UK Parliament. This bill increased the tension between Irish Protestants and the Catholics, which created a crisis and a prediction of a civil war. Interestingly, the bill was published on the 11th of April 1912, the same day the Titanic made her final stop at Queenstown, now Cove. Asquith also mentioned a pre-planned event where 100,000 men in Belfast would manipulate dummy icebergs to practice the Olympic colliding into the berg. In real life, this practice never happened, and even if it did, this wouldn't work because Titanic's insurance was increased before her maiden voyage. From this, the director of the International Mercantile Marine Company, J.P. Morgan, received $12.5 million in insurance payouts from Lloyd's. If the ships were switched, it would be easy to notice. Olympic's keel had been damaged following the Hawk collision as the superstructure had wrapped and she had a bent keel. She had a permanent 2-degree list to port, and this couldn't be corrected without rebuilding half of the ship. Despite being fully repaired, she would go on for another 23 years before she was scrapped in 1935. And for a switch to happen, both Olympic and Titanic would have exchanged parts, including their nameplates, names on lifebelts, and lifeboats, as well as the bells, menus, interior signage, and brass fittings. All of this would have been impossible to do within a few months, but since the ships had a different size and tonnage, length, windows, joint platings, and portholes, White Star or the IMM would never have gotten away with a full-on switch. If they had done that, the company would likely have been accused of crimes like manslaughter if they abandoned the ship and don't mean to murder people on board while sinking. Overall, this would have been noticed and would have caused a huge scandal. Another note to point out is the switch of the propeller blades. Upon their construction and fittings, both sister ships have different blades. Olympic ships had 4 blades and 2 outboard wing propellers that were 23 feet and 6 inches in diameter, which is a pitch for 35 feet with 3 blades bolted onto the heads. Titanic, meanwhile, had a 3-bladed propeller in the center, and although their propellers were the same length and size, the Olympic's original wing propellers had a pitch of 33 feet. In the aftermath of the collision with the HMS Hawk, it was believed that a starboard propeller shaft was removed from the Titanic in October of 1911. This removal was planned for the shaft to be relocated to the Olympic as an emergency repair. During this time, the Titanic was outfitted at a deep water wharf at Belfast Harbor. It is not certain if this story was true or not, but there are photographs dating back to 1911 and in January of 1929 that might have been used as evidence to back this story. In 1911, the Olympic was in the Thompson dry dock, and this was where the shaft was rumored to have been swapped. However, the Titanic was in the fitting out wharf with her launch cradles removed and the bolt holes sealed with rivets. But there are no backup resources to suggest that the Titanic was in the dry dock between October and November 1911. Another thing to point out was the measurements of Belfast Harbor. The harbor had the longest deepwater quay at 1 kilometer in length with a draught of 10.2 meters. So, it's unlikely that it would be impossible that a switch would occur. In February 1912, the Olympic throws a propeller blade on her port side while she was on another transatlantic voyage. This evidence was recorded in the book Gilded Tragedy, with Titanic survivor Mary Eloy Smith and her husband Lucian Smith were on board the Olympic. At the time they were on board, the West Virginian couple noticed that the ship had struck a submerged object and sheared off a blade from one of her wing propellers. It is not known what the cause of the incident was, but it would have likely have been a 30-foot-long drifting spar in the steamship lane. After limping back to Belfast, the Olympic arrived at the Thompson dry dock where she was waiting to be prepared. It was on that day that she and the Titanic had their photos together. In the only photo of them, you can tell it isn't easy to spot the differences in height and length from the keel to the top of the funnels, which is both at 175 feet or 53.3 meters. However, the Titanic was 1,000 tons heavier than the Olympic. Titanic's gross register tons is 46,329 and Olympic's gross register tons is 45,324. However, it is said that once in the dry dock, the ships would have switched. But while it is known that a dry dock can be flooded to allow a vessel to be floated in, but then drained to allow the vessel to rest on a dry platform, how could the switch happen? Well, it would be what the blades were made out of. Even though the 3 outer blades are bolted onto the heads, the central propellers were made out of a single cast of magnesium bronze. If they were attempted to be moved, it's likely the men trying to switch the blades would drown if the waters was flooded into the dry dock. This would have been a serious health and safety issue, but since there were no proper health and safety regulations in the shipyard at the time, having the story floating around the shipyard and beyond would make sense. Harlan and Wolff kept spare blades, though the propellers on both ships were stamped. In a picture from the wreck site, the Titanic's center propeller has been stamped with her number, which was 401. Where the spare blades are or where they went is still a mystery. But the key evidence in this is the fitting of the machinery parts. During her fitting out, the Olympic had her rear funnel stamped on it with the number 400. The funnels were made at the Harlan and Wolff workshop and would have been overseen by Thomas Andrews and the shipyard's workers. The funnels were made out of steel sections which were riveted together. Since there was additional strength to the structure, it would have been impossible to adjust the number inside, especially with the ventilation in the 4th funnel. But then again, the number would be easy to miss. Therefore, in conclusion, the switch theory is a myth. From the evidence we had covered, it's clear that the rumors were based on anti-Semitism and political speculation. But this is an opinion based on what we know already. Henceforth, if there is no further evidence, this case is closed. Although we didn't have time to look over the topic, there is a website that goes into great detail about the theory. Titanic Switch Theory Exposed has a variety of articles that goes into the story and shares his thoughts too. If you want to have a look for yourself, head over to the Titanic Switch Theory Exposed website. A link will be left in the description box below.
And a really massive thank you to my friend DK for narrating the video and debunking the switch theory once and for all. Hopefully this will be the last time we would cover the switch theory, not only on this channel, but in the Titanic community too. DK is part of my Discord group that I have set up within the last few months. If you would also like to check out the Discord group, I will leave a link to it in the description box down below. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe for future videos. Until next time, this has been History Inside a Nutshell, departing from the docks. Thank you so much for all of your support and enjoy the rest of your voyage.